Two pointers, 1956 to 1961. Children, I have something very wonderful to tell you. Mother Catherine, my headmistress, stood on the raised dais in the school hall, presiding over the morning assembly. I was in the senior school now, and at 12 was still slightly in awe of the formality and the size of my new surroundings. We stood in alphabetical order in lines of classes, mine the first form by the wall. Mother's eyes were shining with enthusiasm. Her hands, draped in the long black ceremonial sleeves, were clasped together with suppressed emotion. I shifted from foot to foot uneasily. These ecstatic announcements were frequent and never seemed to me to occasion much rejoicing. You all know Miss Jackson, she continued. Some of you, the older girls, will know her very well indeed. What can she have done? I thought to myself. Miss Jackson taught A-level physics to a handful of girls in the sixth form. She was a pale, colorless figure. Sometimes I glanced at her as she strode round the school with her white overall flapping round her short legs, her frizzy hair gripped back from a bony face. I glanced at her and mentally dismissed her. Perhaps she's got married, I thought with a flicker of interest. Then I shrugged. Unlikely. Well, Miss Jackson has decided to give her life to God. Mother Catherine's deep voice rang out dramatically. She has decided to become a nun. I gasped. I'd always known in theory that nuns were ordinary people once, but in reality they had seemed a separate species. I looked at Mother Catherine with new eyes and for the first time noticed that she was a lovely-looking woman. No, perhaps woman was the wrong word. I couldn't imagine her in ordinary clothes with hair and legs. Not quite, but her face was lovely. We filed out of the school hall, each one of us dropping a curtsy to Mother Catherine as we passed the dais. Fancy that, I whispered to my friend Diana. It seemed a terrible fate. More fool her, Diana replied. I can't think of anything worse, can you? I shook my head. And never getting married, Diana sounded aghast. Imagine actually choosing not to get married and not to have children. I'm going to get married as soon as I leave this dump. She looked contemptuously at the cream walls of the corridor, punctuated here and there with bulletin boards. And I'm going to have masses of children, 7 at least, aren't you? I nodded. I had always assumed that I'd get married. After all, everybody did, but suddenly getting married seemed rather less attractive. It was so predictable. We entered the classroom and began scrabbling in our desks for our French textbooks. Still, Diana went on, I don't suppose Miss Jackson would ever have gotten married, do you? She was pretty ugly, really, and old. No, I agreed with Diana. I don't suppose anyone would have married her. Well, then it's probably all for the best. Anything's better than being an old maid. I'd die if I wasn't married before I was 20. It'd be so embarrassing. During the morning, I forgot about Miss Jackson. During the lunch hour, however, I noticed a photograph on the bulletin board that hadn't been there that morning. It was, I realized with a shock, Miss Jackson. I looked closely at it. She was wearing a long black dress, a little cape, and a short, floppy white veil. Her hair was drawn back tightly from her face, and she looked out at the camera with an expression of, what was it? Yes, surprise. Even Diana was impressed. I wonder what it's like, she muttered. Golly, doesn't she look ghastly? We both involuntarily looked down the corridor to the baize door that separated the school from the enclosure where the nuns ate, slept, and prayed. We were never allowed to go through that door. She'll know now what they do all the time, I said, staring at the photograph, fascinated. I remained at the bulletin board, studying Miss Jackson's expression. What had she seen to make her look so surprised? It was an intriguing thought. I looked at her face. She seemed so ordinary, but really, I thought, she couldn't have been ordinary at all. You seem very interested in that photograph, Karen. I spun on my heel and found myself looking up at Mother Catherine. I was in awe of her. She swept around the school, remote in her exalted position, but when you had a chance to talk to her on her own, it was easy. She was smiling now, looking down at me questioningly. Yes, Mother, I said feebly. It was that kind of obvious statement that grown-ups often made, expecting you to reply significantly. I could never think how to go on. What does it make you think? Well, Mother, why she did it. I just can't think why anyone would want to be a nun. Why not? Well, it must be terrible, I said, and then blushed. That wasn't very polite of me. I'm sorry, I said hastily. I don't mean to be rude, but what seems to you to be the hardest thing about it? I thought there were so many horrors, but then I thought of the happiest moments of my life, the holidays. The first day of the holidays filled me with a pleasure that almost hurt. Well, never being able to do what you want to do, I'd hate not to have some time to myself when I'm free to do whatever I want. Sleep late, read, and be able to go on reading all day if I want to. You mean freedom, Mother Catherine said. She smiled. But no one is really free much of the time, Karen. Think of your mother, any mother of a family. She's not really free to do what she wants either. I was silenced. It was absolutely true. I thought of my mother endlessly running from chore to chore, shopping, cleaning, cooking, mending, washing, ironing. But my mother has fun sometimes, I said. A nun can't really enjoy herself, can she? It must be like Lent all the year round. Mother Catherine laughed. Well, she said, a nun doesn't enjoy herself in quite the same way as people in the world do. Of course not, but that doesn't mean she isn't happy. Happy? I wrinkled my nose. Have you ever seen an unhappy nun? Again, I was silent. No, I thought of the nuns' smiling faces, unlined and peaceful. I looked up at Mother Catherine. Her eyes were smiling at me, and behind the smile there was a peace and a stability. When she was talking to me, she wasn't like other grown-ups I knew. Their minds weren't ever with me 100%. The anxious lines around their mouths, the flickering moments of worry in their eyes showed that their minds were teeming with a dozen preoccupations. But Mother Catherine's mind was uncluttered. No, you all seem happy enough, I said grudgingly. Why do you say it like that? Well, Mother, I can't really imagine how God can make you happy, really happy, that is. I know he ought to, but it's very difficult to believe. Why? Mother Catherine spoke quietly as though she were thinking over something precious and secret. Nuns often did that, I noticed. They smiled with amusement when you talked to them about God as though they knew something nice that you didn't. Well, it's hard sometimes to believe that God is a real person. Of course he is, she laughed. But what about other people, I said, rather dismayed. Don't you ever get lonely or fed up with having a hard life? Not going to the theater or watching television? She gave me a long look. When you're in love with the things you do with the person you love, when you're in love, the things you do with the person you love are always exciting and wonderful, even when they're difficult. And are you in love with God? I said, amazed. Love was a fairly abstract idea for me, but I knew what being in love was. It made the heroines in films and plays rush about, sing, do incredibly difficult dances, surmount all kinds of difficulties. Are you in love? I asked again. Mother Catherine nodded. Yes, she said very quietly. There's the bell. You'd better hurry along to class. She turned on her heel and started off down the corridor. She never really walked anywhere, I realized. She seemed to swoop and float. Not so difficult from those film stars after all, perhaps. As she reached the foot of the stairs leading to her room, she turned around. Come and talk to me about this again, won't you, Karen? I was reminded sharply of Miss Jackson a few weeks later on my grandfather's birthday. It was 20 October 1956, a cold autumn day, and the family, gathered together for a celebration, were sitting together around the fire, which as usual was banked up far too high and roared dangerously up the chimney. Good God, Madge, said my father irritably, that fire's positively lethal. Whenever we got together like this with my grandparents, there was tension, I thought. Why? I followed my father's eyes and looked at Granny, standing by the window pouring sherry into a glass. Her hand, I noticed, trembled slightly, and the drink splashed onto the crocheted white cloth. I felt protective of her, tiny, skinny, her spectacles perched perilously on the end of her nose. She looked so frail. In a family of giants, the two of us were the odd ones out, united by our small stature and the growing complicity of our minds. My mother was sitting near me by the fire. She was smiling. "What are you drinking?" she asked pleasantly, but with a heavy edge of significance. "Gin?" "Gin?" Granny was horrified. "Gin? I hate gin. Hate it," she repeated emphatically. "No, I'm having a little sherry." She held up her tiny glass in which a thimbleful of amber liquid glowed in the angry firelight. "I never drink gin." I felt my parents' eyes meeting over my head. Granny had taken her glasses off and her eyes flickered round the room. They looked frightened and alone. "I'd better go and look at the dinner," she said. "Karen, go and help Granny," said my mother, prodding me urgently in the back. I got up and followed her out into the kitchen, which was filled with a savory smell from the oven. Vegetables bubbled busily on the hobs of the old gas stove. It was a steamy, comfortable place. I perched myself on the formica-topped table and sat there, legs swinging while she jabbed the potatoes with a fork. I got up and followed her out into the kitchen, which was filled with a savory smell from the oven. Vegetables bubbled busily on the hobs of the old gas stove. It was a steamy, comfortable place. I perched myself on the formica-topped table and sat there, legs swimming, while she jabbed the potatoes with a fork. "Nearly done," said Granny. "It'll be another quarter of an hour, I think. When I was at school," and her voice was softened with memory, "I'd have been expelled for knowing what a potato looked like before it was cooked. A lady didn't do this kind of thing then." We laughed comfortably at ease together. This was familiar ground. Granny had been in a convent school in Liverpool run by the same order of nuns that taught at my own school. That had been an important factor in my parents' choice of a school for me. "You liked school, didn't you?" I asked. "Yes," she was smiling quietly. She was smiling quietly to herself, then suddenly she coughed loudly. "Sorry," she apologized. "I've got a bit of a tickle in my throat." She turned her back to me, and with a nervous glance in the direction of the living room, she went to the tray beside the stove, which contained a large array of cooking bottles, vinegar, oil, brown sauce, and one squat green bottle. She filled a generous glassful of a clear liquid like water, and coughing markedly at me, knocked back the draft in one swift action. She cleared her throat. "That's better. It's a nuisance, this cough." I turned my eyes resolutely away from the green bottle and deliberately closed a shutter in my mind. This, I knew instinctively, was something that I mustn't know about. "Can I do anything to help, Mummy?" my mother called suddenly. We both froze and looked guiltily at one another. "No, thank you, dear," Granny called back. "Karen's doing a great job out here. We'll be back presently. Help yourself to another drink." "All right," my mother's voice was deliberately casual. Granny went on dreamily. "I was terribly naughty at school. I remember once a priest came to give us a retreat. In heaven, he said, 'You'll be singing 'Glory be to God' forever and ever.' And I whispered to the girl next to me, 'How boring. I don't think I want to go to heaven.'" Granny went on dreamily. "I was terribly naughty at school. I remember once a priest came to give us a retreat. In heaven, he said, 'You'll be singing 'Glory be to God' forever and ever.' And I whispered to the girl next to me, 'How boring. I don't think I want to go to heaven.'" "I know what you mean," I said. "It sounds awful, doesn't it? Glory be to God forever and ever. But if you didn't want to go to heaven, there was only one alternative." I shuddered. It was a dilemma. Unfortunately, the priest heard me whispering, and when he had finished his talk, he said very solemnly, "Who is the little girl who doesn't want to go to heaven?" "Oh no," I breathed. "How dreadful. Did you own up?" "Yes," she smiled slightly and leaned against the wall, her eyes fixed dreamily ahead. "I had my holy innocence medal taken away from me as a penance." "Do you think you'll go to hell then?" I masked the fearful import of the question with a giggle. "Yes," she laughed. "Oh yes, I expect the devil's got a nice warm spot for me down there. Do you think those potatoes are done yet?" I prodded them. "Not quite," I said, preoccupied. Hell terrified me. It seemed so hideously easy to go there. "But you have to commit a mortal sin to go to hell, don't you?" I asked. "A very serious sin indeed, knowing that you're doing it." "Yes," Granny laughed hollowly. "Yes, that seems to be the idea." I looked at her. She seemed so harmless, and I loved her with a great rush of tenderness. "Well," Granny said, looking wistfully at the green bottle, "I think we'd better be getting back to the others. You dish up those potatoes and leave them in the hot drawer, will you?" "Thanks. I'll just put one or two things away in the larder." She disappeared into the tiny little room next door, carrying the bottle of Worcestershire sauce and, I saw out of the corner of my eye, the green bottle. Standing at the sink waiting for her, I saw the darkening garden outside, looking misty and sinister in the autumn twilight. The world seemed a puzzling place. "I think you'll have to go to heaven, you know, Granny," I said. "I don't think you're bad enough for hell." My mother's eyes bored into Granny as we entered the room. I went over and sat close to my mother, smiling up at her, feeling that in some way I didn't understand. I had been disloyal. Saturated with warmth, I gazed into the flames of the fire. Just time for another drink, Granny said briskly. We ought to leave the meat to stand for a few minutes, don't you think? Is Karen old enough to have a sherry? Oh, yes, I think so. My mother's voice was cheery, consciously filled with the birthday spirit. Just a small one. Would you like a sherry, Karen? No, I answered promptly without thinking. The refusal was automatic, for some reason that I would not analyze. It was impossible for me to accept. No, thank you, Granny. I watched her walk across the room, replenishing my parents' glasses. As she navigated the coffee table, she stumbled slightly, and my mother's sharp intake of breath cut through me. But as soon as she caught me looking at her, my mother smiled and said, What were you two gossiping about in the kitchen? Oh, Granny was telling me about her school, I answered. It still sounds awfully like my school, you know. We do all the same things, have all the same customs. My mother said vaguely. You were happy at school, weren't you, Mummy, like Karen? For a moment, her eyes were wary as she listened to what she had said, startled. You like the same things? Happiest days of your life, Madge? Asked my father genially. Granny glanced at my grandfather, who was still quite oblivious to his birthday celebration, and her eyes wandered aimlessly round the room. Yes, I expect they were in a way. School was? I said, appalled. Yes, Granny said musingly. You know, you think you hate it while you're there, but lately I've been looking back at those days over and over again. We were happy. She sipped her sherry reflectively. I looked at Granny in amazement. Surely not. Everybody knew that school was terrible. Life began once you had left it behind you, didn't it? I suppose they were, Granny repeated quietly. You know, she smiled inwardly. When I was just a little older than Karen, I must have been about 16 or 17, I wanted to be a nun. My mother wouldn't let me. You never know, she added obscurely. It might have made all the difference. Yes, perhaps I should have been a nun. Seeds had been planted. Lindsay's illness, Miss Jackson's decision, and this conversation with my grandmother were helping me to grow accustomed to an idea, the idea that people like me could become nuns. These incidents raised a question that at the time I preferred not to examine too closely. It was to be some years before the seeds blossomed into a decision. The year 1960 was an important one for me. I was 15 and eager to break out of the sheltered world of childhood, but the adult world turned out rather differently from the way I'd expected. One thing that turned out badly was my friendship with Susie. I remember how it all came to a head one hot September afternoon. Susie and I were sitting in our garden. She was lying sprawled in a deck chair, her skin-tight jeans stretched over her thighs, her breasts peeking provocatively under her orange t-shirt. I glanced down at my own lumpy body. Susie was formed. She was complete and ready for life. Her lips were coated with orange lipstick. Her nails, why would mine never grow that long, were gleaming orange talons. She had done her best with me. Under her tutelage, I was wearing a similar pair of jeans and a gray shirt, and my lips were covered with a chalky pink lipstick. Like Susie's, my hair was back-combed into a tangled beehive. I should look all right, I reflected sadly. In fact, if I concentrated on my face, I didn't look too bad. My teeth were much too big, of course, but from the neck upward, I would just about pass. My body had nothing to do with my head, however. I could never look finished, all of a piece. How can you bear the thought of going into the 6th form, Karen? I don't know, I replied untruthfully. It seems endless. The trouble was, I thought, I wanted to do A-levels and go on to college. Susie, and indeed all my friends, couldn't wait to get into the real world. Susie herself, having scraped through 5 O-levels, was leaving school and was about to embark on a secretarial course. The prospect of that just didn't appeal to me. It was no good. I was just different from her. But I did so want to belong to her world. You really ought to get out more, she said. You know, drink a bit, smoke a bit, find a boyfriend. You're really not a blue stocking, you know, Karen. You can be really good fun once you let yourself go a bit. And you would once you got a boyfriend. Fat chance, I muttered gloomily. Fat, I thought, looking down at myself, was the word. By the way, she asked casually, is Tony in? Who? I asked blankly. Oh, you mean Anthony? Yes, he's here. He's in the sitting room, I think, doing something or other. Why? Just wondered, Susie replied lazily. Anthony, my cousin, was staying with us, 2 years older than I. He was about to enter the police force, having decided not to carry on doing A-levels at school. Another one. It's no good, I said in a burst of honesty. I'll never be successful with boys like you are. I just don't look right and I can't talk to them. Goodness, you don't want to talk to them, do you? There are much more interesting things to do with boys than just talking, for God's sake. I laughed knowingly, hoping that it was convincing. In fact, the whole area of sex was a mystery to me. It seemed hedged round with dangers. It was a wonderful thing, I had been told again and again, but if you did it when you were not married or when you were deliberately preventing a baby from being born by means of some mysterious devices, it was a mortal sin. And that meant that if you did not truly repent, you went to hell for all eternity. And what exactly was it, anyway? In biology lessons, the nun who taught us made us read the chapter on reproduction by ourselves. It seemed to be all about rabbits, and I didn't think I had much in common with a rabbit. The technical details of sex were shrouded in a disturbing obscurity, And then once you got a boyfriend, there was all that business about going too far or making yourself cheap. Susie, I asked diffidently, aren't you ever afraid that you'll get pregnant when you go with boys? Of course not, she laughed confidently, happily ignorant of the fact that in 3 years' time she would have to get married. There's loads of things you can do before you go that far, I blinked uncertainly. What on earth could she be talking about? And what about those dark masculine urges that I was constantly being warned could not possibly be controlled? But confessing my ignorance would be too humiliating. Yes, I know, I lied, but don't they want to do the whole thing? Oh, yes, she answered complacently, stretching her body in the sun like a contented cat. But I can always handle them. By the way, she sat up suddenly. Can I go and phone my mother to tell her when I'll be in? She dusted a few blades of grass off herself. Sure, I said, reaching for my book. It was The Mill on the Floss. I watched her go into the house and turned back with relief to the ordered world of literature. I'd nearly gotten to the end of the novel. Poor Maggie, I knew just how she'd felt as a child. Ugly, precocious, a misfit, then she'd become a beauty. Her position was hopeless, but the ugly duckling blossomed into a swan. I read of her drifting down the river with Stephen Guest, conscious of impending disaster. After a while, I glanced at my watch. Good heavens, Susie'd been gone for a quarter of an hour. Her telephone conversations with her mother were usually brief to the point of rudeness. What could be keeping her? I went in to see. I walked through the kitchen into the front hall. There, through a crack of the door that had been carelessly left ajar, I saw them. Susie was sitting on the hearth rug, her head bent back, her eyes staring blindly at the window. My cousin Anthony leaned over her. One of his hands kneaded her back. The other hand squeezed and paddled in her neck. Even as I watched, their lips joined in what I recognized was a familiar embrace. I watched the long kiss, mesmerized. Then shamed, I stole into the kitchen. Sitting there at the table, I reviewed a world made suddenly impossible. Anthony and Susie must have been laughing at me for suspecting nothing of their relationship. The feeling of exclusion I had experienced in the garden flooded back, more intense. Seeing them like that made all the difference. Hitherto, the only kisses I had really seen were on the television screen in plays and films that glamorized them, presenting love as a cataclysmic, all-revealing passion. But this was the real world. I could not go along with it. This, I told myself in a sudden cold certainty, was not passion. But it was the stuff of which most marriages were made. No one would ever want to do that to me, I knew. But no longer did I want them to. How could Susie do it? Anthony with his pimples and his moods, like all his friends? No, the whole thing was certainly not for me. With a shock, I heard the front door opening. My mother was back from the hairdresser's. Guiltily, I stole into the garden and picked up my book. I don't mind, really, Anthony, I don't mind for myself, but with Susie, she's such a little slut. She's having such a bad influence on Karen. I heard snatches of my mother's fury. Suddenly, the idea of being a bride of Christ seemed enormously attractive. I thought of Anthony. There seemed no comparison. Of course, I wasn't going to be a nun, I told myself. The idea was ridiculous. To be as fulfilled as Mother Catherine was a reward for having given up an awful lot. Books, theater, freedom. Until an hour ago, I would have added sex. But that no longer seemed any sacrifice at all.